If you look to Nigeria in these days, you see a nation that is troubled, a country that seems to be suffering a twin curse. Prosperity has deserted it, and the citizens are not safe as they go about whatever business they may still have. Now, security and a means to make an honest living, those were key promises made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on the campaign trail before he took office last May. Now, less than a year later, his administration is overseeing an economy that's in tatters and a currency that has slid against the dollar, pushing the cost of imports up. Now, the one thing Nigeria has plenty of is the so-called bandits, criminal kidnappers by any other name. They struck again last week, seizing almost 300 children and staff in the town of Kuriga in the troubled north. Now, for the release of their captives, they're demanding 1 billion naira.
Kuriga's classrooms, usually full of children learning, now a deserted reminder of fear and terror. Classes were just about to start in this primary and secondary school for 1,000 students. Then hell broke loose, this boy recounts.
The bandits came on motorcycles. They started shouting and shooting. All the students ran away into the nearby bush. While I was running, one of the bandits followed me, but I could dodge him because he was following me on a bike. I was running and looking for a way to escape, and I could escape across the road. I ran into the bush and came back home from there.
Aminu's father is in shock. His second son, a 15-year-old, is still missing, one of hundreds who did not manage to escape. This mother has 5 of her 6 children among those abducted.
We don't know what to do, but we believe in God. We have no security, no soldiers, no police to protect the school.
The abduction is one of the worst school kidnappings since the Chibok girls in Borno State 10 years ago stunned the world. Up until now, many of the Chibok girls still have not been found. Nigeria is faced with a kidnapping crisis. It's not only mass abductions from schools, but buses and trains, as well as individuals that are targeted. From July 2022 to July 2023, at least 3,620 people were abducted in Nigeria. Since President Tinubu took office, abductions have gone up, despite his pledge to make security a top priority and invest more in personnel, training, equipment and pay. None of that made any difference in Kuriga when authorities finally arrived. They were met with anger and frustration.
Please come and help us. Don't leave us. Please help us. Where is the president? Where is the governor?
The government has announced a special intervention squad for Kaduna State by the end of April, 10 years after the Chibok girls were seized, plunging Nigeria into its kidnapping crisis.
To get more insight into the security situation in Nigeria, we've invited Nnamdi Obasi onto the program. He is a senior advisor on Nigeria for the International Crisis Group, and he joins me from Lagos. Welcome to DW News Africa, Mr. Obasi. I want to begin by asking you about what the authorities can do to ensure that the children who were kidnapped in Kaduna are brought home.
Well, I would think they have 3 broad options. The first, of course, is to conduct a military operation to try to rescue the children. But, of course, we all know that that would be quite hazardous because the armed groups, the kidnappers, would use the children as human shields, and we could incur huge casualties. The second option is the one that the government has always preferred, which is to negotiate and make concessions to the kidnappers in order to free the children. Of course, it has the lowest risk to the children, but at the same time, it feeds into continuing impunity, which we have seen over time. But then the third option, which we are considering, being considered very strongly by people in government, is to just keep pressure on the armed groups, on the abductors, to keep pressure on them, limit the territories on which they can move, sustain psychological pressure using military and air assets and so on, until you wear them down, and then then they are ready to make a good negotiation and then release the children. I think those are just the three options that are available now. Otherwise, the government is in a difficult situation.
Understood. When Boko Haram kidnapped the Chibok schoolgirls in 2014, there was a jihadist motive. The group said that it was opposed to girls receiving Western education, and we know that many of the girls were forced to marry their abductors. Today, so-called bandits are carrying out these attacks, various armed groups. Has this now evolved to just becoming a business model without the jihadist ideology?
Absolutely correct. I think over time, obviously over time, the kidnappings that have been perpetrated as part of the jihadist campaign have, receded to the background. The overwhelming number of kidnapping incidents and the number of victims have been by criminal organizations, whether we call them bandits in the northwest or by, just organized gangs in other parts of the country. So at this point, the great concern is not really so much about the jihadist groups in the northeast. They are still active. They still do abduct people. But the vast majority, I think we could say that about 80–90% are now by bandit groups and other criminal organizations around the country. So it's now more of a criminal activity than a jihadist activity.
Part of the problem is that these armed groups are able to access guns, and it looks like easily so. How is this happening, that armed groups have access to this kind of weaponry and the resources they need to be able to carry out these attacks?
Well, a lot of the arms have come from Niger Republic, from the Sahel. Some sources, trace them right back to the collapse of the government in Libya and the flood of arms that got into the Sahara and the Sahel, from that point. But then basically the northern borders of the country, bordering Niger Republic, are, appallingly porous. And so a lot of arms and other illegal merchandise coming through those areas. So a lot of the arms are coming from outside, but there's also a lot of local fabrication that is taking place. So the armed groups are constantly building up their arsenal. But then each time they carry out the kidnappings and make a lot of money, then that provides resources from them to import more arms. So it's a revolving door and a continuously feeding process. They extract money, they extort money, they exact ransoms, and then that helps them to build up increasingly powerful arsenals to the point that they are able to bring down military aircraft, which we have seen in recent times.
Mr. Obasi, looking in from the outside, it seems as though the authorities in Nigeria have lost control of the security situation. Would that be your assessment?
No, I wouldn't think that the authorities have lost control of the security situation. But what we are seeing now is that the authorities have not demonstrated a resolve to deal with the problem in three respects. First of all, we don't see the will. There doesn't seem to be the will to deal with the problem decisively. Once in a while, after every kidnapping, after every outrageous incident, the president gives directives, marching orders to the military, to go after the kidnappers and that kind of thing. But soon, that wears out. But what we find, there's a lack of will. There is a lack of plan about what to do to solve this on a long-term basis. There is not a cohesive, comprehensive plan that details what is to be done about, kinetic responses, non-kinetic responses, the role of the federal government, the role of state governments, and so on, in a concerted way. It's not there at the moment. And then the third dimension is that resources, haven't been applied to this. The number of troops is still very small. The number of police is deficient. Equipment-wise, they're also very lacking, especially in the technology, the logistics and communications that they need to go after these groups. And then finally, after each incident, there is not an attempt to go, determined effort to go after these groups and bring their leaders to justice. So there's a reign of impunity, that continues. And that gives the impression that the government is not yet quite serious about dealing with this problem. This is a generally shared impression in Nigeria.
All right, that is Nnamdi Obasi, Senior Advisor on Nigeria for the International Crisis Group. Thank you for your insights, sir.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.